Hey everyone. Um, awesome. So good to see you guys back again. Um, so this is the second design diary for Scrap that I'm posting on YouTube, of course, and there's um, not as much of a big change as last time compared to the rework of programming, but there's still a lot to talk about for the upcoming release of 0.10. So 0.10 kind of marks a big I guess it's a big landmark, I guess, or a big achievement for me because it's the first time that I'm going to be putting the game onto the Steam Workshop. So it's going to be open for more public playtesting now, um, amongst other people. And so as long as I'm getting some level of feedback from other people, that's really what I'm aiming for there. So I'm going to put a few disclaimers and stuff in the app itself, but hopefully that will get some more playtesting out there. And I'll make some announcements around letting people know that there's a great new free game that they can try out. So hopefully that will be an exciting thing. That's kind of the public playtest side of it announced, but really I need that blind playtesting to start to see how people play it without me present. I've had a few interesting things happen in the past where I gave it to one person who knew how to play the game, and they showed it to their friends, and they played for 6 hours, and that was completely different from any experience that I had in the game. So when I say they played for 6 hours, I'm not saying that they played the game, finished, played again, finished, played again, finished. The game took 6 hours. I don't know how that happened, but it was very interesting to get that feedback from people saying, we feel like the game's a little bit slow, but they still played through and were engaged for the 6 hours. So I guess that was a good thing. But anyway, enough rambling about that. Public playtesting is a good thing because I get some different feedback than what I might be expecting. That's that in summary. Okay. Anyway, in 0.10, there's a few important changes that are coming through. For those of you who watched the previous video, 0.9 had a new change to programming where it was now 2 cards that you were planning. So you'd have 2 cards that were active, one that would resolve next, and one that would resolve the turn after. What would happen? So what that caused was more simultaneous play. People were engaged more frequently, and it was all around a positive experience. That was in the first playtest of 0.9. I just had a second playtest of 0.9 just then, where I trialed something extra, which I discussed, which was each player had to discard an additional card whenever they placed a function into their program. The idea of that was to solve the problem of someone just holding and sandbagging their movement cards until the very end, and basically making it so that it was really difficult to actually jump in and attack them because they would always be able to respond. Even if it was a little bit delayed, it just meant that there wasn't always a window to attack someone. And the discarding was supposed to kind of improve that. There were a few things that we noticed with the discarding. The first thing was that it actually slowed down play quite significantly because there was a lot more, I guess, analysis paralysis when it came to that point. The other thing was it was a little bit fiddly in that sometimes people would forget that they needed to discard and then they'd have to go back and do it. Or alternatively, they would just, again, be thinking way too long about what to discard, and then people would lose track of exactly where they were in the turn. That was also a result of the simultaneous play, where I think there were a couple of times where someone might have skipped past something they were supposed to do or things like that. And the discarding was just adding that extra step in there. So it's not so much that the discarding itself is complex, it's not, but adding that extra step in between was causing a few problems. But I had a really great suggestion from someone who I bounce ideas off of a lot, and that was to make it so that the cards in hand have a slight cost on them. Now, I was a bit wary about this at first because I tried to completely remove any kind of economy from the game a while ago. Back in the earlier versions, it was actually quite a big scrap economy where bots cost scrap, buildings cost scrap, everything costs scrap. And so a lot of the game was actually going around and trying to harvest these resources. You might actually notice now that scrap is almost non-existent in the game. And the reason for that was because costing was a very weird thing to have in the game, which is funny because it originally started as one of the most central concepts of the game, this idea of a finite economy. But it's moved very much away from that, and I think much for the better. So when I heard the suggestion, I was a little bit hesitant about it because I didn't want to introduce costs back into the game. But the suggestion was that the cards with a cost should just cost you cards from hand. So when you reveal them, you just discard that many cards. So as an example, if you had the construct card, which is quite a good one, you might have to discard multiple cards from hand in order to resolve it. That way, it's simple. You don't have that decision up front of, okay, I need to think of what to discard right now. Okay, now I'm holding everyone up. Instead, it's just when you flip the card, the more powerful cards will require you to discard. The other thing that does is it makes it so that there's a few more interesting things that I can do with hand management as well. So one of the things that I considered doing was making it so that the reboot function only returned a certain number of functions to your hand. So it might not actually return all of your functions anymore. It might only return, say, 4 of your functions to your hand. And that means you really have to think about what functions you're going to need and what to get back, rather than just getting back everything and having all your options all the time. And that's something I'm really excited about trying. Again, it might not work, and it might just be that you need to return all of your functions back. But I think it's something that's worth exploring. So in 0.10, one of the changes will be that some, not all, but some of the cards in your hand will require you to discard other cards to play them. For example, the construct function, or some of the functions that let you do multiple things at once, like move and attack. They might require you to discard other functions from your hand. The other thing that's going to be trialed is that the reboot function won't return all of your functions to your hand. I want to see how that goes and what impact that has on the hand management. I'm hoping that it will be interesting enough without introducing a lot of complexity and a lot of, I guess, fiddliness to the game. The other thing that's being reworked, and I did post this up in the Discord group, is the way the research market works. So the upgrade market is working a little bit at the moment, but it's not a great part of the game. Whenever I play it, I always find it a little bit fiddly too. It's not that it's always necessarily hard to understand. It's just that it doesn't achieve the purposes that I'm trying to do with it. One of the fundamental principles of the game is that you're supposed to be able to form these combinations. Pyromaniac, I know, is quite a big fan of trying to find the combos to assemble. And again, that's a really big part of the DNA. It came from my love of Blood Rage, where, just getting a two-card combo that work together just feels really nice. The way that I was trying to achieve that was by placing the combos into different colors, so that you were then encouraged to go and interact with a player in order to get the combo piece. While that's kind of working, the way the research system functions at the moment means that you're actually rewarded for studying the same person over and over again. And a lot of the time, you'll just kind of get a research card of a color, then try and get all the research cards of that color. Or at least that's what seems to be happening, because it becomes cheaper and cheaper to get research cards from the same player. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage you to diversify and get these interesting and wacky combinations from lots of different areas. So what I've done is, rather than making the cost reduced by color, I've made it reduced by some different things. As an example, I can't really show it on the screen again. Can't share my screen, and I really need to get that sorted. But what you're able to do, so in the top left corner, there'll be an icon that might be like a gun, for example, and that represents that it's a military tech. Down the bottom right, there'll be costs. Part of the costs will be different icons. If you have those icons, you simply ignore that cost. Otherwise, you've got to pay extra research in order to get them. So effectively, if you keep studying military texts, you'll get better at getting other military texts. Just as an example. The key thing there is that it's not that you're better at getting your own texts, it's that you're better at getting military texts of any kind. Understanding how a gun works makes you better at understanding how that person's cannon works, for example. And that, I hope, should encourage people to branch out a little bit more into other trees. There's a few other small changes that are going on with research. So one of the things is that you're now not taking a token every single time you get an analyze option. Instead, you just have a track which you'll move up. That's basically just that's a logistical difference rather than an actual mechanical difference. But one thing you can do now is that you can spend 2 research tokens belonging to any players to act as one symbol for any player. So effectively, even if you haven't encountered Meteora on the other side of the board, you still have a way in order to get their text if you want to. Now, that seems to run a little bit counter to something I'm trying to do, which is to encourage interaction, because people who sit in the corner with lots of labs can get text from other players. There's a few things that counteract that, though. First off, interacting with other people is still very efficient. It's much more of an efficient way to actually get text than it is to research them. The second thing is that sometimes you actually want to go and interact with people. You're trying to do what I'm encouraging you to do, but it becomes very difficult to actually track someone down and get into a fight and research them. There's lots of barriers sometimes that cause you to not be able to do that. So effectively, to clarify, you'd be able to spend 2 research of your own, for example, to act as one icon belonging to an opponent. So it's less efficient, but it still gives you the option to actually get stuff if you want to. And I've thought about that as far as a lot of the starting cards go and what starting builds you can do. And there are ways that you would be able to get opponents' technologies starting up. And I think that's actually kind of interesting in that it's just increasing the amount of options you have available to you at the start of the game if you do a little bit of comboing and a little bit of thinking. That's a lot of the intention of it. The final thing that's going to change is back to the functions, sorry. The functions are going to get streamlined a little bit. At the moment, having 11 functions in your hand is a lot. There are a lot of things that go on. So what I'm doing is I'm going to make it so that there's a general pile of functions. At the moment, there's a functions market where you've got the deck and you've got 3 cards that come out. I'm also just going to make a couple of stacks of some functions that are a little bit more advanced, but are still things that people might want frequent access to. And when you play your learn card, you'll be able to get a function from there. That will let me chop out things like the charge card, for instance, where it now won't start in your hand. It's something that you can learn very easily if you really want it. But it's just something that cuts out of your initial 11 cards. Some of the feedback I've gotten is that the 11 cards at the start is very daunting, and I totally agree. If I got thrown 11 cards at the start, I'd just be thinking, this is crazy. So I'm trying to cut it down to about 7. Ideally, what I would really want is have about 6 basic functions that are kind of common to everyone. Then what I think would be cool is that if each faction only had 5 of those functions and 2 unique ones. So there's a function that every faction is missing, which I think creates a little bit of interest and asymmetry as well. But they also have 2 extra things that only they can do, just to increase a little bit of that, again, the asymmetry, I guess. I'm not always very good with my vocabulary and I use the same words a lot, but you understand the point that I'm trying to make. Effectively, I'm trying to make each faction feel much more different. And I think that some of the way I can do that is by preventing them from having access to certain things early on. Now, an important thing, and I did bring this up in the game too, is that I don't want factions to be completely locked out of doing something. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I don't want to give one faction 2 building cards and no combat cards, for example, because then what are you going to do? You're just going to do building. You're not going to do combat. So I've got to find functions, or at least create starting decks for each faction in a way that they're still able to do things. They might have a little bit more difficulty doing a particular thing, or it might be that their combat card doesn't make them as effective at killing, or something along those lines. But every faction should still be able to do everything if you want to. Scrap is intended to be a sandbox, ultimately. You go in, you do what you want. If you want to play Cerebrum and you want to make them the most aggressive faction possible, despite the fact that they have a combat weakness, go for it. Go around and kill people. That, like, if you can pull that off, that'll be fun. And I don't want that to necessarily be a massive challenge. It's something that might not be inherently what they're trying to do, but it's not something that's impossible for them. At the same time, if you want to play Meteora as a combo-y science faction that just tries to get into one big fight here and there, then that's cool too, and you can do that. I want you as the player to be able to make the decisions on what you would like to do in the game. I don't want to tell you what to do. I think that giving players the creativity to play the game however they want is probably one of the best things that games can do. So that's something I'm still trying to retain in my design. Yeah, I think that kind of summarizes 0.10. Just looking at that. So move, engage, scavenge, research, constructs. Yeah, so that's right. So basically, no, that's fine. Brainstorm away. So I totally agree with you. So constructing is a core part of the game. Scavenging is a core part of the game. Core part of the game. Moving, core part of the game. Engaging, at least having the option to engage is core. And researching 100%. I would also say building bots, to clarify, being able to get more bots into play, which has actually just reminded me. That's something else that's changing and getting a little bit streamlined. So at the moment, it's actually a little bit hard to get out bots. The game has gone a bit topsy-turvy in the way that deploying bots has worked. It used to be really easy, and then it was really hard, and then it was really easy again, and now it's back to being a little bit hard. So one thing that I did do in version 0.9 is I basically eliminated the colony from being a factory unless you're in that create mode, which let you count it as a factory. What that's kind of caused is it's actually really hard to get more bots out, and that's not intentional. You should be able to get more bots out and be more willing to risk them. And so I'm moving back to the colony counting as a factory, and I'm making it so that the empowered ability of the create is now just put a bot into play from your pool. Now, that kind of brings me to the big bots. So the big bots at the moment have a cost, and that sometimes is a little bit prohibitive in the sense that it can be really difficult to get the big bots out. And it's made people a little bit concerned about deploying them and wasting all the effort. So rather than making it harder to get them out, because the big bots are a really big and fun part of the game, I'm trying to make it easier by allowing it so that the boosted ability of the assembly card now just lets you deploy a big bot. That's all it does. So all the big bots now will no longer have a cost, which is a nice streamlined thing. And instead, you just get to deploy them. Of course, that does make it a bit tricky because I've got to make sure now that the big bots all feel like they're worth their cost of 0. And by that, I mean, I can't just make one bot better than the other. They have to be different, but all interesting in order to make sure that them all being free still works. I'm trying to think if there's any other big changes. I mean, obviously, because the colony is going to count as a lab, there's a slight change to research. It's getting a bit buffed. But other than that, those are the main things, I think. For those of you watching at the moment, do you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, something to yell at me? Give it a couple seconds. Okay. Well, in that case, I mean, I'm going to jump onto Discord right after this anyway. So if you do have some questions, feel free to pop them on there. Well, I hope I answered it, but yeah, I'll pop onto the Discord. I'm happy to chat about things, explain more, and all of that. But I think I'll leave this video about the 17-minute mark. So yeah, look forward to 0.10, the first open release.